It started on a Tuesday night, the kind of night that felt heavy with the weight of the world. I had just moved into my new apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, seeking a fresh start after a messy divorce. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but I was determined to make it feel like home. As I settled in, I found comfort in the routine of my evenings, cooking dinner, watching TV, and sipping a glass of wine while the city buzzed outside my window. That night, I was drawn to the window, the cool glass pressing against my forehead as I gazed out at the street below. The streetlights cast a warm glow, illuminating the quiet scene. I watched as a few cars passed by, their headlights slicing through the darkness. It was peaceful, almost serene, until I noticed him. At first, he was just a shadowy figure standing across the street, partially obscured by the trees lining the sidewalk. I squinted, trying to make out his features, but the dim light made it impossible. He stood still, his posture rigid, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I was new to the area, and it was easy to feel unsettled. I turned away from the window, shaking my head. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. I poured another glass of wine and settled onto the couch, trying to distract myself with a mindless reality show. But every few minutes, I found my gaze drifting back to the window, half expecting to see the figure still standing there. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced at the clock, midnight. I decided to call it a night, retreating to my bedroom. I pulled the curtains closed, hoping to block out the world outside. But sleep eluded me, and I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The next evening, I found myself drawn to the window again. I told myself it was just curiosity, but deep down, I knew I was searching for that figure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, I spotted him once more. He was there, standing in the same spot, his gaze fixed on my apartment. My heart raced, and I felt a mix of fear and intrigue. Who was he? Why was he watching me? I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, that he was simply a passerby. But as the days turned into weeks, he became a constant presence in my life. Every night, without fail, he would appear at the same time, standing silently across the street. I never saw him move, never heard a sound. It was as if he were a statue, frozen in time, watching my every move. I began to notice details about him. He wore a dark hoodie that obscured his face, and his hands were buried deep in his pockets. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something, and the thought sent shivers down my spine. I tried to ignore him, to go about my life as if he didn't exist, but it was impossible. I felt his presence like a weight on my chest, suffocating and inescapable. One night, I decided to confront my fear. I opened the window, the cool night air rushing in, and called out to him. "Hey! What do you want?" My voice trembled, but I was determined to break the silence. He didn't respond. He simply stood there, unmoving, as if he hadn't heard me. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, slamming the window shut. But deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had to find out who he was and why he was watching me. I couldn't let this shadowy figure invade my life any longer. Little did I know, the answers I sought would lead me down a dark path, one that would unravel the very fabric of my past. The following days were a blur of anxiety and determination. I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure across the street was somehow connected to my past, a past I had tried so hard to leave behind. I spent hours researching the neighborhood, combing through online forums and local news articles, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain his presence. I learned that my apartment building had once been a part of a larger community, a neighborhood that had seen its share of tragedies. There were whispers of a missing person from years ago, a young woman who had vanished without a trace. Her name was Sarah, and the more I read about her, the more I felt a strange connection. She had lived just a few blocks away, and her disappearance had left a scar on the community. As I dug deeper, I discovered that Sarah had been last seen near the very spot where the figure stood every night. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I realized that I was living in the shadow of her unresolved fate. I couldn't help but wonder if the figure was somehow linked to her disappearance. Was he a witness? A friend? Or something far more sinister? Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to visit the local library. I hoped to find old newspaper clippings or police reports that might shed light on Sarah's case. The library was a dusty, old building filled with the scent of aged paper and forgotten stories. I spent hours sifting through archives, piecing together the fragments of Sarah's life. As I read, I learned that she had been a vibrant young woman, full of dreams and aspirations. Friends described her as kind and adventurous, someone who would never just disappear without a reason. The more I learned, the more I felt a sense of urgency. I needed to know what had happened to her, and I needed to confront the figure who watched me from across the street. That night, I returned home with a heavy heart and a mind racing with questions. I had gathered enough information to piece together a timeline of Sarah's last days, but it only deepened my unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far darker than I had anticipated. As the sun set, I prepared myself for another night of watching. I set up a small camera by the window, hoping to capture any movement from the figure. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but a part of me was terrified of what I might discover. The hours dragged on, and I found myself staring at the screen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Just as I was about to give up, I saw him. He emerged from the shadows, standing in his usual spot, his hood pulled low over his face. My heart raced as I focused the camera on him, my hands trembling with anticipation. Suddenly, he moved. I watched in disbelief as he took a step forward, crossing the street with an eerie calmness. My breath caught in my throat as he approached my building. I felt a surge of panic, but I couldn't look away. I had to know what he wanted. He stopped directly in front of my apartment, his gaze fixed on my window. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see right through me. I wanted to shout, to demand he leave, but I was frozen in place. The silence was deafening, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. What did he want? Why was he watching me? I quickly reviewed the footage, hoping to catch a glimpse of his face, but the low light made it impossible. That night, sleep eluded me once again. I replayed the events in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into a web of secrets, and I was determined to unravel it. The next day, I decided to visit the local police station. I needed to speak to someone about Sarah's case, to see if they had any leads or information that could help me understand the figure's connection to her. As I walked through the doors, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I was stepping into a world I had tried to avoid, but I knew I had to face it head-on. I approached the front desk, my heart racing as I explained my situation to the officer on duty. He listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "You're saying you think someone is watching you because of a missing person case from years ago?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling. "I think it's connected. I've been researching Sarah's disappearance, and I believe the figure is linked to her somehow." The officer leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he regarded me with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Look, I understand that you're concerned, but it's been years since Sarah went missing. We followed every lead, and there's not much we can do without solid evidence. If you're feeling unsafe, maybe consider talking to a therapist or a friend." His dismissive tone ignited a fire within me. I wasn't just some paranoid woman, I was trying to connect the dots of a mystery that had haunted this community for far too long. But what if this figure is connected to her disappearance? What if he knows something? I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. The officer sighed again, his patience wearing thin. "Look, if you see him again, call us. But until then, there's not much we can do. Just be careful, okay?" I left the station feeling frustrated and powerless. I had hoped for more support, but it seemed I was on my own in this. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. I needed to take matters into my own hands. That night, I set up my camera again, determined to capture more footage of the figure. I had a plan. I would confront him, demand answers, and finally put an end to this torment. As the hours passed, I felt a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through me. I was ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. When the clock struck midnight, I saw him emerge from the shadows once more. My heart raced as I focused the camera on him, capturing every moment. He stood there, as he always did, but this time, I was ready. I opened the window, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "Why are you watching me?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness of the night. "What do you want?" He didn't move, didn't respond. I felt a surge of anger and fear. "If you know something about Sarah, you need to tell me." I pressed, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, he shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of his face. My breath caught in my throat. His eyes were hollow, dark, and filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place, sadness, perhaps. Or was it something more sinister? "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distance. The words sent chills down my spine. "Help you? What do you mean?" I demanded, leaning out of the window, desperate to hear more. But he simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the night as quickly as he had come. I felt a mix of confusion and dread. What did he mean by "help me"? Was he a victim, or was he somehow involved in Sarah's disappearance? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the brink of uncovering something monumental, but I needed more information. The next day, I decided to visit the local historical society. I hoped to find more about the neighborhood's past, perhaps uncovering details about Sarah's life that hadn't made it into the news. The society was a small, unassuming building filled with dusty archives and old photographs. I spent hours poring over records, searching for anything that might connect Sarah to the figure. As I sifted through old yearbooks and community newsletters, I stumbled upon a photograph that made my heart race. It was a group picture from a local high school, and there, in the back row, stood Sarah, smiling, vibrant, and full of life. But next to her was a boy I didn't recognize, his face partially obscured by shadows. I felt a strange sense of familiarity wash over me, as if I had seen him before. I took a picture of the photograph with my phone, determined to find out who he was. As I continued my search, I learned that Sarah had been involved in a close-knit group of friends, but after her disappearance, many had moved away or cut ties with the community. I felt a growing sense of urgency. I needed to find someone who knew her, someone who could help me understand the connection between Sarah and the figure. That evening, I decided to visit a local bar that had been a favorite hangout for Sarah and her friends. It was a dive, filled with the scent of stale beer and the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. I approached the bartender, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, and asked if he remembered Sarah. "Yeah, I remember her," he said, wiping down the bar. "She was a good kid. Always smiling. But it's been years since she went missing. People don't like to talk about it." "I think someone is watching me," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. The bartender paused, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "Watching you? What do you mean?" His tone shifted, a hint of concern creeping into his voice. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. "There's a figure who stands across the street from my apartment every night. I think he might be connected to Sarah's disappearance." He said, "Help me. I need to know what that means." The bartender's expression darkened, and he leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, kid. You don't want to get involved in this. There are things in this town that are better left alone. Sarah's case, it's not just a missing persons report. There are whispers, rumors about what really happened." "What do you mean?" I pressed, my heart racing. "I need to know. I can't just ignore this." He hesitated, glancing around the bar as if ensuring no one was listening. "There are stories about a group of kids who used to hang out together, Sarah, her friends, and a boy named Jake. They were inseparable until she disappeared. After that, things changed. Some say Jake was involved, but no one could prove it. He left town shortly after, and no one's seen him since." "Jake," I repeated, the name echoing in my mind. I pulled out my phone and searched for any information I could find about him. "Do you know where I can find him?" The bartender shook his head. "No one knows. He vanished, just like Sarah. But if you're looking for answers, you might want to tread carefully. Some people don't like digging up the past." I felt a mix of determination and dread. I had to find Jake. He might hold the key to understanding the figure watching me and the truth behind Sarah's disappearance. I thanked the bartender and left the bar, my mind racing with possibilities. That night, I set up my camera again, but this time, I was more focused. I needed to capture the figure's face, to confront him with the knowledge I had gained. As the hours passed, I felt a sense of anticipation building within me. I was ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. When the clock struck midnight, I saw him again. He stood in his usual spot, his hood pulled low, but this time, I was prepared. I opened the window and shouted, "I know about Sarah. I know about Jake. You need to tell me what happened." He didn't move at first, and I felt a surge of frustration. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the stillness. Finally, he stepped forward, and I could see his face more clearly. The shadows revealed a young man, his features gaunt and worn, eyes filled with a haunting sadness. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't know what you're getting into." "Then tell me," I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. "Tell me what happened to Sarah." He hesitated, glancing around as if he feared being overheard. "It's not safe to talk here. Meet me at the old park tomorrow night. I'll tell you everything." Before I could respond, he turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me with a whirlwind of emotions. I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. I was finally on the verge of uncovering the truth, but at what cost? The next day dragged on, each hour feeling like an eternity. I couldn't focus on anything but the impending meeting. As night fell, I made my way to the old park, a place I had heard about but never visited. It was overgrown and desolate, the remnants of a once vibrant community space now shrouded in shadows. I arrived early, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for the figure to appear. The air was thick with tension, and I felt a sense of foreboding wash over me. What if this was a trap? What if I was walking into something I couldn't escape? Just as I was about to turn back, I saw him emerge from the trees. He looked different in the moonlight, more vulnerable yet still haunted. "You came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to know what happened to Sarah," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "You said you would tell me." He nodded, glancing around nervously. "It's not just about Sarah. It's about all of us. We were kids, caught up in something we didn't understand. Jake, he was obsessed with her. When she disappeared, everything fell apart. We all thought he knew something, but he left town before we could confront." The figure took a deep breath, his eyes darting around the park as if he expected someone to jump out of the shadows at any moment. "We were just kids, you know. We thought we were invincible. Sarah was the light of our group, always laughing, always pulling us into her adventures. But Jake, he was different. He had this darkness about him, something we couldn't quite put our fingers on." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean? What happened that night?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. "It was a party, a bonfire down by the lake. We were all there, Sarah, Jake, me, and a few others. We were drinking, having fun, but Jake, he was acting strange. He kept pulling Sarah aside, whispering to her. I thought it was just a crush, but it felt off. Like he was trying to control her. Did something happen?" I pressed, my heart racing. "Did he hurt her?" The figure shook his head, his expression pained. "No, not like that. But after the party, Sarah went missing. We searched everywhere, but it was like she vanished into thin air. Jake was the last person seen with her, and when the police questioned him, he clammed up. He left town the next day, and we never heard from him again." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "And you think he knows what happened to her?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice trembling. "But I've seen him since then. He comes back sometimes, always lurking in the shadows. I think he's haunted by what happened, but he won't talk about it. I've tried to confront him, but he just disappears." "Why are you watching me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation. "I thought you might be able to help. You remind me of Sarah, strong, determined. But I didn't expect you to dig this deep. You're in danger now. If Jake knows you're looking for him, he might come after you." A wave of dread washed over me. "What do you mean? Why would he come after me?" "Because you're asking questions he doesn't want answered," he said, his voice urgent. "He's not the same person he was back then. There's something dark inside him now, something that's been festering for years. If he thinks you're getting too close to the truth, he might do something desperate. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. I can't just walk away from this. I need to know what happened to Sarah. I can't let her memory fade away like this. The figure stepped closer, his voice low and intense. Then you need to be careful. If you're going to confront Jake, you have to be prepared for anything. He's not just a kid anymore, he's a man with secrets, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to keep them buried. As he spoke, I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. I couldn't turn back now. I had come too far, and I owed it to Sarah to uncover the truth. Where can I find him? I asked, my voice steady. I don't know exactly, he admitted, glancing around nervously. But I've seen him near the old warehouse by the docks. It's a place where people go to hide, to escape. If you're going to confront him, that's where I'd start. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. Thank you for telling me this. I'll be careful. As I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm, his grip firm but desperate. Promise me you'll be careful. Don't underestimate him. He's dangerous. I promise, I said, pulling away from his grasp. I felt a mix of gratitude and fear as I walked away, my mind racing with the implications of what I had just learned. The next day, I prepared myself for the confrontation. I gathered my courage and made my way to the old warehouse, my heart pounding with each step. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground, and I felt a sense of foreboding wash over me. As I approached the warehouse, I could see the dilapidated structure looming ahead, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. I had to confront Jake, to demand answers about Sarah and the figure who had been watching me.